Hello everyone. It had been 2 months since the last big update of the original Old Republic had released, introducing players to the return of the Grey, and it wouldn't be long until the next addition to the game would arrive, since on April 14th, 2013, patch 2.0 released, bringing the players to a new confrontation with the infamous Hutts upon the unstable planet of Makeb. And what an expansion it was, bringing to the players a full 5 new levels to go through across the new unstable planet of Makeb, where the Hutts are mining for a new resource that may change the course of the entire war. We got a different story for both the Empire and the Republic, allowing for replayability for both factions. Makeb certainly was a standout planet when compared to what had come before. Questing on planets before Rise of the Hutt cartel was, well, it was kind of a mess. You had the class story for the planet, then also the main planet story, and a bunch of different side quests. This isn't so much of a problem today, since you can fairly easily get through a planet level-wise without even touching a side quest, or even the main planet story. But back at this time, leveling took a lot longer, and basically required doing these extra missions. This led to players having multiple quests that they would be doing at the same time, with them being highly disconnected, and making it feel like you're just running around doing busy work. Looking back, Makeb was really a breath of fresh air for the game, with the main DLC storyline being the main source of questing for the planet, with a smaller amount of more engaging and better crafted missions being scattered about. It also helped that the planet looked beautiful, especially when compared to the planets in the main game, and to this day, it is still one of my favourite looking planets in the entire game. The Rise of the Hutt cartel is truly what set the game on the path of being what it is today, with adding a bunch of features which are hard to imagine the game without these days, such as achievements, the priority mission terminal, a 5% XP boost for guilds, and lots more. Despite not adding any new flashpoints on release, the expansion did in fact add a long-wanted feature to the game, that being hard mode flashpoints. This went back and upgraded the flashpoints Aphis, Cadamino, Hammer Station, and Mandalorian Raiders to being the equivalent of level 55 content. While many of the features added were ones which were badly needed for the game, some of the new features were, well, odd. I'm referring to the macro binoculars and seeker droids. I mean, they encourage players to go back to all the planets, which is always welcome, but it just sort of felt half-baked personally. Especially the macro binoculars. I don't know, it was just a really odd feature. One of probably the saddest departures from the original game is the lack of participation with your AI companions in the story. In the main game, your companions will comment and even take part in parts of the main story and even some side quests. This is unfortunately not present in Rise of the Hutt cartel. Although, okay, to be fair, it is understandable. At this point in the game, each class had 5 main companions, plus the robot caretaker of the ship, who you got when you first got your ship, plus, for some who had actually bothered to get him, HK-51. This would have meant that it would have required an insane amount of time and money to give all of the companions the depth of interactions that they had in the main game class stories. Which makes it completely understandable why they were not included in depth. However, I can't help but feel this was the beginning stages of the regression of the companion system, which led to where we are now, with so many companions without true backstories or any depth that you can just get off the cartel market. It would have been nice to have a new companion for either faction, but I suppose it's just wishful thinking. At least the actual story was engaging enough. But how was the PvP content? Well, it was next to non-existent on release. I mean, there was still technically world PvP on PvP servers, but if you got into any trouble, you could just retreat to a faction base and be safe. It also didn't help that dedicated PvP servers were dying at this point, and there wasn't much of an incentive to play on a PvP server instead of a PvE one. With update 2.4, however, there was an attempt to revive the PvP scene, with 4v4 Warzone arenas, and they did make further attempts later on, but I don't feel like it ever truly recovered. The expansion also completely dropped the space battles, which, let's face it, is probably for the best. Especially since, before the release of the next DLC, a full-fledged Starfighter mode was introduced. Although I'll talk about that more later. Update 2.1 brought with it new customization features, finally allowing players to change race and appearance. The update also brought with it dye modules, the collection tab, as well as Scafar species, and the ability to rename characters. All of these features were long sought after, very welcome to the game. While more operations were added later, on release the Hutt cartel only came with the Scum and Villainy operation, which was the 4th operation in the game, and the first level 55 operation, which could be played in 4 different difficulty modes. The operation featured 7 different bosses: Dask Road, Titan 6, Thrasher, Operation Chief, Olak the Shadow, Cartel Warlords, and Dreadmaster Steerak. The operation was certainly better than those that had come before it, with it having decent bosses with interesting mechanics. Terror from Beyond was also raised from level 50 content to level 55, with forming the technically second operation of the expansion, although it was just recycled content. Later on, the Dread Fortress and the Dread Palace were added, and all of this kept the operation-based community of the game relatively happy, and pretty well occupied. The Titans of Industry update finally brought some new flashpoints to the Czerka Corporate Labs and the Czerka Core Meltdown, as well as the new mission area CZ-198. This update also brought the Tauntaun creature mounts for Hutt, which, okay, I'm going to be honest, I never realised these weren't part of the core game till I went over the patch notes. A new companion was finally introduced, and surprisingly, it was an Ewok. This time there was no long storyline involving a multi-faction treasure hunt, instead for a relatively large upfront sum of credits you were able to purchase Treek, who is a healer. For those of you who don't know, back then each companion normally had a dedicated role and a secondary role. For example, some companions would mainly be a healer, although they could DPS. This was mainly to complement the fact that each subclass would have a dedicated DPS option, as well as a dedicated tank or healing option, meaning that your companion could fit the role you needed most. Just as a side note, it also added my personal favourite event, the bounty hunting event. One of the biggest additions to the game which came during the Hutt cartel era was the addition of Galactic Starfighter. This was a type of content that the game hasn't seen before, or even since. The previous Starship content was a repetitive on-rails shooting gallery where you used your personal starship. It wasn't particularly good, and after release, they never really added anything to it in any notable fashion. Therefore, it was rather surprising when Galactic Starfighter was released in early access for subscribers, and it was discovered that not only was this actually a good all-round decent game mode, it had so much depth to it that it was almost a full expansion in of itself. The best part is, it was free and accessible to all levels. Finally, we had full control of starfighters in fun maps in a 12v12 battle. Galactic Starfighter gave a variety of different ships, each of which came with a wide array of different customization options and crew options. It's a real shame that Starfighter is almost dead at this point, though. I don't know why, the community for it has just sort of died. It can take upwards of 30 minutes to get into games sometimes. Towards the end of the Hutt cartel, we got an interlude to build up to the next DLC. This brought with it several new flashpoints, starting off with the Empire attacking Typhon and the Republic attacking Korriban. These two flashpoints are the first time we really went to an enemy-controlled planet in such a fashion, and felt like we were actually doing real damage. This was when we were first given the inklings of a conspiracy on both sides of the war. Later we would get the depths of Mayan, where we finally meet Jakaro and come to understand the depth of the conspiracy, while building up the Revenites. This conspiracy came to a head with the Legacy of the Ktaka flashpoint, marking the last big combat content drop before the release of Shadow of Revan. The interlude is something which was attempted again several times with varying success. I wouldn't say that any of their future attempts would ever build up a DLC as well as the interlude to Shadow of Revan did. Update 2.9 brought to us the Strongholds. Finally we had a place we could call our own which wasn't a cramped starship. We originally only had the Capital World apartments, the Nar Shaddaa Stronghold, and the largest being the Tatooine one. While the ability to add objects to our home was tied to a hug system, this in fact wasn't too bad since there was enough customization to keep most players happy. It also made it easier to travel to your starship and the fleet, which certainly cut down on a lot of backtracking in the game. The entire system just went to add a whole new layer to the game, and I myself have redone Flashpoint several times just for the decoration rewards. I've seen many MMOs try to create a similar sort of home system, and while none of them have ever hit as low as the garrison system in WoW, I would argue that this is probably one of the best I have seen. It is important to mention that back then, when this first came out, there was nowhere near the variety of decorations as there are today, with most of them being tied behind the annoying crafting system and cartel coins. Luckily, this system would have been expanded over the course of the next few years. Not only did we finally have homes for our characters, but these strongholds could be purchased for guilds, and there was a special guild exclusive flagship. These things weren't cheap, mind you, with them costing a wafty 50 million credits on release, and that isn't even taking into account the expansions of the ship. There was also the first version of Galactic Conquest, which finally added some sort of guild-based quests. The Rise of the Hutt cartel was exactly what the game needed to not only keep it alive, but prove that the game was here to stay. Over the course of its lifespan, the expansion brought with it so many different features that today seem almost unimaginable without. Truly, this expansion made the game what it was, However, it won't be long until a brand new expansion changed the game even more, and brought with it one of the greatest characters in Star Wars into the forefront. But, well, that's a topic for another video coming very soon.